can you just give a bit of context to everyone about where your fingers are at, like in terms of your basic benchmarks of finger strength, like for certain lifts and hangs on an edge with added weight? Where are you at with your PBs?
I think if we're talking of fingertip strength, which is the one that I think most climber will relate to a lot. I just actually just broke my own record this week. So I did 107 kilos on 18 millimeter edge. So that's for me, that's my personal best on that right now. The Rolling Thunder, which is another device that's very popular in the arm lifting community. I've done 105 in training, and Saxon bar, which is a pinch bar, like a 3-inch pinch bar that looks almost like a deadlift bar, but you pinch it. And that I've done 120 kilos. So yeah, those are kind of like the benchmark. And I've lifted the inch dumbbell, the Thomas inch dumbbell, which is a very famous dumbbell that it went for a very long time. No other person could lift it. And I'm not an expert, but apparently I was the lightest person to ever lift this dumbbell. And so that's a couple of the few benchmarks I guess I've did in the finger strength world.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, some of these benchmarks, because yes, they're really hard to, in a way, match or compete with, but they're very basic metrics that give anyone that watches one of your videos or listens to this podcast an idea of the kind of standard that you've got to. And I suppose the human potential of where the forearm or the hand and the thumb, etc., can go in terms of force generated.
Yeah. And like the 18 mil too is like one hand. So I forgot to mention, I guess it makes a big difference to one or two hands. But I think it's interesting because for me, I was introduced to this sport just a few years ago. I was invited to a local competition like the King Kong, which is an international competition, but it was hosted at a local venue at my own climbing, my local gym. So I was invited there by a friend. That's where I met Eric Roussin. I think you had a talk to him as well recently. So that's how we met. And it was crazy because he lives maybe a block away from my house, and we started training at night and, sharing training ideas. And it's been a wild ride. And I've been really interested in this sport because for me, I saw a really good crossover between both discipline, climbing and arm lifting. And I was curious to see if some of the stuff I would do in there or I would learn would carry over and improve in my performance in climbing. So yeah, I was like, I had a couple of lovely surprises that it does transfer well. Plus, it was interesting for me to do a new sport, but I was able to compete at a high level, but I didn't have to, sacrifice a lot because of the carryover. I could do both together. So use some of the finger training and then do some climbing, and they would go well together, and I didn't have to sacrifice one or the other. So
one of the reasons why I finally actually got round to interviewing you and a number of other athletes that work in or compete in the grip sports is that we saw a really big change in climbing habits in terms of training when the pandemic happened, because a lot of people were looking at ways of training their grip strength, finger strength, in a more mobile manner where they didn't have to set up a fingerboard, or they had shoulder injuries, or they didn't want to overdo it in terms of the load in one singular plane of motion. And the whole lifting thing, I just think really took off in the last couple of years. But we're trying to like catch up with 10, 15, 20 years of arm lifting experience very quickly and trying to learn what's the best practice.
Yeah. And what's interesting, what I noticed right away because I had a background in climbing before, is when I got into the arm lifting world, I noticed that a lot of the competitors, or the very strong competitors, are big, like they're big guys, most of them are going to be over 200 pounds and they're very muscular, they have large hands. And the lighter weight divisions, a lot of climbers are very, very small and very strong for their weight. I think climbers have a lot of potential to do very well in arm lifting, and especially represent climbers and do very well in these weight categories, at the lower weight categories, because there's still a lot of growth to be made there, and it's a little bit less common to see lighter weight athletes. So there's definitely a lot to we could do a lot of damage, I think, in the arm lifting world if we start to compete in there.
I just wanted to ask about, because it's something that just immediately cropped up in my mind, was when I was just asking you there about kind of some of your standard benchmarks that you had with things like what was it? Is it you call the axle lift?
Yeah, the axle or the rolling thunder.
The rolling thunder, and then what's this big square bar called?
Oh, the Saxon bar. Yeah,
the
it's
Saxon
like
bar.
A bench bar. Yeah.
Were there certain things that you found transferred very quickly from climbing, which you immediately got very, very good levels at in the arm lifting world, but others where you went, whoa, I've had to put some hard work into those, I didn't transfer immediately?
Yeah, one of the funny ones actually is like, so the thick bar, like the rolling thunder, the axle, those are the ones that I had to put the most work into, because first of all, I don't have a massive hand. Like my I think it's, I don't know, I never really measured like my length of my hand, but for these bars, most of them are like around like 2.5 inch, so like pretty big. And it's almost like I don't have as much purchase as some of like the really big competitors that have like 9 or 10 inch mitts, you know, that can get their hands like all the way almost around. So that was definitely one of the very challenging ones for me. I had to put in a lot of work to improve and to be where I wanted to be. And the axle, same thing. I've never really did that much weight training, and at first was deadlifting that much weight. I had to work a lot on my technique to make sure I wouldn't get injured. And so that's one that was a little bit more challenging, where I had to actually do some work and do some deadlifting and train on my technique a lot more. And then some of the pinch, that one's very surprising as well, because I thought when I first competed, I thought that climbers would absolutely demolish in pinch strength. I thought we were going to be, when I first competed, it's like, wow, there's a pinch event, I'm going to do really well. But actually, I don't think we're that strong at pinching. Personally, I know I'm not that strong at pinching, but what I'm really good at is compression strength. So squeezing. So if I look at both like a one-hand pinch, my results not going to be that impressive, like on a global level. But as soon as I get to use both hands and I can compress using my backs and my lats, then my numbers just like skyrocket. So I noticed that I started noticing that climbers, we're maybe not as strong at pinching as we think we are, but we are very strong at compression and squeezing, or I am anyway. That's something that I noticed. And one thing that I noticed that carried over really well, other than the some of the device that we're used to, like the finger lifts, kind of like the like all those portable hangboards, those carry very well. That's probably the best correlation for transfer to climbing. One that I really like was the wrist wrench, so which is basically a tubing, like a handle that's about 2.5 inch and has a strap that you wrap around, and when you pull on it, it's kind of hard to describe, but like when you pull on it, it has a very unique feeling where it kind of like attacks your wrist and it wants to open your hand and your wrist and open up your wrist. And that is one, I trained for that one for a competition. I think it was Canadian arm lifting nationals. And I started training on that a lot. And I didn't do any climbing training. And when I just, the Beastmaker slopers, like the 45. So when I went on those, I could do so well. I could hold them with one hand or even had weight with one hand. It's something I've never been able to do or envision it be possible. And that is 100% has to do with that. Like I've noticed that even if I warm up, say if I want to do some sloper training and I warm up with that, my performance always goes up if I do a specific warm up with that device. So this one definitely, it's something I never thought that maybe wrist had a big factor in climbing performance, especially on slopers, but I think it does. It has a good carryover, and it's something maybe we could learn and benefit from in climbing for sure.